our guest this evening, Dr. David Hamilton. I mean, he is a gentleman who's been around for a long time, and the reputation is huge. And I can't quite work out why we've never had you here before. But now he is. And, of course, you know, there is science, there is medicine, but there is also the mind. And I think some of you here already know that these are things that all work together. But how much and how can we use this more to our advantage? So I'm really excited to have David here. So please give a big round of applause to Dr. David Hamilton.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here. Lots to share with you, and this is only my second ever time in Glastonbury. I can't really believe I've never been here so much, because I used to live in Windsor. You can tell by the accent, eh? Yeah, but no, we moved back to Scotland about 4 years ago or something. So I'm relearning the Scottish accent again. So hopefully I'll have got it sorted by the end of the talk. So for those of you who don't really know my background and what I kind of talk about, I used to work for a big pharmaceutical company. I was what you call an organic chemist. Nothing to do with organic food, unfortunately. An organic chemist is, we take bunches of atoms and you stick them all together to make shapes. Pretty much the way that a child takes Lego bricks and sticks them together and makes shapes, makes buildings, except the shapes that an organic chemist make end up as drugs in pharmaceutical industry. So people like me typically end up working for big pharmaceutical companies. And I was developing drugs for heart disease and cancer. And I loved the job. I loved the chemistry, you know, because I did my PhD in learning how to make these shapes out of atoms. But what really fascinated me when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry was what happens when you test the drugs. Because you have to prove that a drug works. And the only really way to do it properly is to give it to people. So what you might do is you give 100 people a drug, and then you give 100 people a fake drug, which most of us nowadays know that's called a placebo, typically made of sugar or blackboard chalk, with a wee bit of glue in there. Not actually real glue, you know, like super glue. But in much the same way that if you're making a cake, you take the flour and stuff and you bind them with an egg. Otherwise, if you forget the egg, you get just a pile of powder. Similarly, with a drug, you've got a binder. But anyway, there's nothing in it, in the placebo. But what amazed me is my main field was cardiovascular. And what really astonished me, and especially when I started looking into the statistics, is if you give 100 people a drug and let's say, 75 people improve or make an improvement, it's not uncommon to get, out of the 100 to get the placebo, it's not uncommon to get 40, 50, 60, 70, 75, 76, sometimes improving on the placebo because they think they're getting the drug. And I thought, isn't that extraordinary? So I started researching the mind-body connection while I worked as a scientist in the pharmaceutical industry. And that for me became much more interesting than doing the chemistry and building the drugs, was if we could understand the mind and emotions and the effect it has on the body, and then even learn how to use that, then maybe that would be a better thing for me. Anyway, it was my inspiration, so I decided to resign from the pharmaceutical industry and start writing and learning and educating on the mind-body connection. So this talk will be a distillation of just about everything that I've ever learned. So I'm going to talk fast. Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, but just about everything I've ever learned on how the mind-body connection works. But first of all, I'll bet every single person in this room has experienced a placebo effect, but you just didn't know that you did. Now, hands up if you've ever taken an aspirin or a paracetamol. Right, so 74, sorry. Okay. No, so you will have experienced a placebo effect. Now, I'm not suggesting that aspirin and paracetamol don't work. Of course they work. Organic chemists like me used to build them. You stick them together, you stick the atoms together for a reason. But the fact that you go into a shop and buy it, or you take it because it's already in your cupboard, tells me one very important thing. You must believe in it. You must expect it to work at least a little bit, otherwise you wouldn't take it. But that believing in it or expecting it to work actually makes it work better. It actually amplifies it. If you totally didn't believe in it, if, for example, you went to the doctors and the doctor had their back to you and you felt they weren't really listening to you, they were filling out paperwork and you're trying to explain what's wrong and they're going, yeah. And they say, take some paracetamol. And afterwards you're thinking, nah, really don't think that. They didn't listen to me. Nah, I don't think that'll work. Then the drug actually works worse. And so you got the drug, it's that good, but you believe in it and it's that good, and you really don't believe in it and it's down there. And the difference between the best it could be and the worst it could be is actually in your head. For example, you can walk into any supermarket and you can buy paracetamol for 15p. Or you can buy ibuprofen for 25 pence. Or you can buy Panadol for £1.50 or Nurofen for £2.50. Now, most people know that paracetamol and Panadol are the exact same thing. And also know, out with the added caffeine extra versions, but the main stuff, most people know they're the same thing. Most people also know that ibuprofen and Nurofen are the exact same thing. But funnily enough, Panadol does actually work better than paracetamol for most people. And Nurofen works better than ibuprofen for most people. And if you take the statistics back to an experiment done with aspirin a number of years ago, the difference would be about 25%. And you think, how on earth could Panadol be 25% better than paracetamol? Exactly the same thing. Any ideas? Yep, 10 times the price. We've got a wee story in our heads, and the story goes something like this. If it's more expensive, it must be better. Yeah. And we've heard it so many times in our life that we've internalized it, meaning you don't even think about it, it's a root assumption. We've actually had the direct experience of paying more and getting more for it. Right? We've all had the experience of paying an extra £5 for a better pair of shoes, or an extra £5 for a better shirt, or an extra £5 for a better haircut. That doesn't apply to me. My mum cuts my hair. But for those of you who actually pay for your haircuts, we've had the experience of paying an extra £5 for a better haircut. So we've had the experience all throughout our lives. So it's literally etched in the brain that if you pay more, you get more for it. But that little thought itself translates into an effect when you take a drug. So for example, when you pay 10 times for the same thing, then the wee story kicks in, so it must be better. And that little thought, believe it or not, actually creates biology in the brain. So actual little chemicals get produced. When it comes to pain, that thought, that belief that it must be better, causes your brain to produce its own natural versions of morphine and heroin. So morphine and heroin are called opiates. The brain produces, according to your belief, it must be better. Your brain produces what are called endogenous opiates. The word endogenous means it's endogenous to the body. It belongs to the body. It's produced from the inside. So your belief actually makes it work better. So the difference between the best it can be at 10 times the price and the worst it could be, the base thing, is just down to a thought in your head. A similar thing happens with Viagra. Now, I'm not asking for a show of hands. But we know who we are. Sorry, you know who you are. But one of the ways that Viagra works, outside of the actual chemistry, outside of the organic chemistry, the biology of it, one of the ways that Viagra works that makes it work a little bit better is because it's called Viagra. And that taps into a curious little process in the brain regarding how the brain stores memories. And memory is actually one of my specialist subjects, if you like. About 20-odd years ago, I unofficially broke a memory world record for memorizing the order of a deck of cards in 1 minute and 57 seconds after 8 cans of Hampden Lager, which is a Scottish delicacy. My student accommodation was quite close to Tennant's Brewery, and you could get 12 cans for £3.60 when I was a student. But there's a little trick to it, and it's similar to how the name Viagra helps Viagra work better. If you can, memory systems rely on the fact that you can string objects together into a story. It's very easy. There's little code to translate a playing card into an object. Then you just weave the objects together, 52 objects into a story with 52 scenes. Very easy to do when you've had 8 cans of Hamden-Lager. But anyway, but this is, the reason I'm telling you this is it partly taps into how Viagra, the name, how a name for something can amplify the effect. Viagra, not by accident, happens to sound like Niagara. Right? Now, in these memory systems, if you can join 2 objects, either by a story or by a sound, then they're almost kind of linked together in the brain. Albeit it might just be for a short time, but they're linked together. So if you now think of one, it pings the other one, so to speak. So think of what Niagara, the Niagara Falls represents. It's a force of nature, right? Now, when we take Viagra, think it as a force of nature. And it's also, if you think of the symbolism, it's straight, curve at the top, froth at the bottom. Anyway, but I think subconsciously we kind of get the symbolism out. So when a person takes Viagra, because it sounds like Niagara, part of the meaning of what Niagara represents actually impacts the word Viagra. So therefore, the actual drug itself is called sildenafil, but by being called Viagra, it's up there in more ways than one, I suppose. Do you think it would be as good a drug if it was called Flopsy? Of course not. It would still work because the basic organic and biological biochemistry would work. Of course it would. It's called sildenafil. If it was called Flopsy, it would be slightly worse. Called Viagra, it's up there. So again, the difference between the best that can be Viagra and the worst that can be Flopsy is actually in our own heads, isn't it? And I think what I'm trying to get across here is stuff that's going on in the mind exerts quite a considerable biological effect all of the time. We just tend not to notice it. We just don't really notice it. But if you notice it and you understand it, you could start to use it. One of the ways we use it quite a lot is through meditation. Hands up who meditates in here. Oh, quite a lot of, good. I can tell actually because you've got slightly thicker heads. Yeah. No, I'm only joking. But one of the ways that meditation affects us, affects the brain neurologically, is think of the simplest form of meditation is mindfulness. Now, what does mindfulness actually mean? It means become mindful of whatever it is you're doing. So the simplest mindfulness meditation is become mindful of the fact that you are breathing. So you literally, now everyone breathes, but you're not mindful of it. But the moment you become mindful, you notice, oh, I am breathing. I will put my attention on that right now. I'm using my mind to not think about 50 million things, the shopping and what's happening at work and what I need to do in my financial situation. For this moment, I'm becoming mindful of the fact that I am breathing. And as you bring your attention to your breath, you begin, it's almost like you sprinkle fertilizer neurologically at the front of the brain. And the front of the brain here above your eyes, it's called the prefrontal cortex, begins to grow like a muscle, almost like you're working out a muscle at the gym. And technically speaking, in some ways you kind of are. Neuroscientists use that analogy that the brain is like a muscle. Just like I can work out my bicep by doing bicep curls, so you can work out the front of the brain through the practice of meditation. So as you take your mind away from all the different things in your life, and for a short period of time, you become mindful of the fact that you're breathing. And what it does, it begins to impact the prefrontal cortex, and it begins to grow like a muscle. And what happens is little connections begin to grow, almost like you've got 2 trees, and the trees begin to grow branches. So the trees are brain cells, and the brain cells begin to grow brand new branches. And you grow more and more and more and more branches. And what that causes is the front of the brain to become thicker and more densely wired. And that physical change in the brain is caused by the fact that you're using your mind to pay attention to the fact that you're breathing. And you're causing physical, structural changes in the brain. And it goes much deeper than that. Scientists at Harvard Medical School got the last word, I think, in meditation that dealt a blow to all skepticism. When I first worked in the pharmaceutical industry and I started to look into the mind-body connection, as you do, working in the pharmaceutical industry. And I came across scientific papers on meditation. And some of them were quite looking at the positive effects, and some of them were written very skeptically by people who were dishing doctors who'd suggested that patients should maybe try some meditation to help to relieve some of their stress. And so it was a lot of criticism about meditation, and it's just an Eastern thing, has no effects, blah, 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 blah. But Harvard Medical School, I think, got the last word. They got a group of people who hadn't meditated, and they taught them a simple meditation. Notice your breathing. Simple mindfulness meditation. They had to do that for 20 minutes a day for 8 weeks. And they had blood samples taken on day 1 and blood samples taken at the end of the 8 weeks and a genetic analysis done on samples. And amazingly, meditation had impacted 1,561 genes. Now that is 6% of the human genome directly impacted by going like that, by listening to the sound of the breath. And we impact 6% of the human genome. And the genes were acting a bit like light bulbs. You know, you can switch a light bulb on, you can switch it off. In science, it's called upregulation or downregulation, but it's the same thing. It's on or it's off. And amazingly, they found that for those of you who are interested in numbers and stats, 874 genes went on, like light bulbs, and 687 went off. What that actually meant, and the scientists said what that actually meant is there was a net that genetic change meant a net slowing down of the aging process at the cellular level. Now, I can testify to this. I've been meditating regularly for 91 years. I just dye my hair grey at the sides, make myself look more my age. Now, I'm only kidding. I'm only 67, but no. But it's amazing because here you have using your mind to focus on the fact that you're breathing, and you're impacting 6% of the genome, 1,500 genes. In fact, seasoned meditators, it's 2,200 genes they got. And all you're doing is bringing your attention to the fact that you're breathing. And the net effect is a slowing of aging at the cellular level. Isn't that amazing? What we're capable of doing, we just tend not to notice what we're capable of doing. One of the ways we're affecting our bodies every single day is in our daily attitude to life and attitude to people. You know, people talk about whether someone's an optimist or a pessimist or someone who thinks positive versus someone who thinks negatively. And collectively, you can talk about your emotional style. So, for example, a positive emotional style might describe someone whom for the everyday ordinary stressors, so I'm not talking about the life-changing stressful events, but the everyday ordinary stresses, you know what, I'm stuck in traffic. And for example, today, I drove down from central Scotland today. There was an accident on the motorway, added about an hour and a half, 2 hours onto my journey. Didn't get too stressed because I thought, I've left plenty of time. So a positive emotional style looks at what's happening, the stressors of the life as they happen, and says, you know what, it's not the end of the world. There's always another way. Every cloud has a silver lining. You know, I'll get there. Doesn't matter that package didn't show up. I really need it today, but you know what? Life goes on. There's people worse off than me, kind of thing. So that's what you might call a positive emotional style. Your emotional style doesn't get you too much stress. Then on the other end of the extreme, you might have a negative emotional style, where all these little stressors are the end of the world. And it's the worst thing, it's the most frustrating thing, and you get angry and stressed and frustrated, and that slowdown in the motorway, that's really pissing me off, and that's going to have all these consequences, and you build up the stress and the stress and the stress. Now, I think all of us, every other day, are over here in the positive, and all of us probably spend a wee bit of time over here as well. And don't worry if you think, damn it, you know, I got really angry or stressed yesterday. My heart, you know, it doesn't quite work that way. Getting stressed and all that kind of stuff doesn't really do any harm on a day-to-day basis. What actually matters, though, is where would you fit on that scale between a positive emotional style and a negative emotional style? Say over about 15 years. consistently. Where would you fall consistently? If you had to say, where would I be consistently, then what that means is the body has a consistent level of stress, not a lot or quite a lot. So one of the ways that scientists measure the impact of attitude on health is, where would you fit in that spectrum? Does that affect the immune system? So they got a group of volunteers, a couple of hundred people, and they assessed them for emotional style. Then everyone was given the cold or the flu. The way they do it, you get wee nasal drops and you got the cold or rhinovirus or the flu, influenza A. To make the study interesting, a third group did a line of cocaine. Right? Science likes to sex things up a bit. No, they didn't really do that. Just didn't really. But so they got the cold or the flu and they all got put in quarantine for a fortnight. Now, the scientists wanted to see if there was any correlation between your emotional style. Now, that emotional style was taken as a proxy for what you would normally be like. Right? And they wanted to see, is there a connection between emotional style and the immune system and how you deal with illness, how you biologically respond to illness. But you can't just ask people, how do you feel? Because some people might say they feel better than do, other people might say they feel worse. So they wanted a real physical measure. So they decided to measure mucus production. So everyone was given, you know those airport bags you get that you put your toiletries in? So you don't just sneeze into the bag, by the way. That would be gross. But what you get is you get a pile of the airport bags with a label on it with your name on it, and you get a box of tissues. And the instructions are that every time you cough or sneeze or produce mucus, you use your own tissues, and you put them in your own bags, and you zip it shut. And at the end of the day, a technician comes around and picks up all the bags, all your bags, and weighs them. And you can take off the weight of the plastic or the polythene from the bags. If you've used 5 bags, then they know how much 5 bags weigh, so they can take that weight off. And you get a net weight of mucus. Pretty gross study, to be really honest with you. But get this. Those with the positive emotional styles produced about 50% less mucus than those with the negative emotional styles. So here you have a real measure. And also, those with the positive emotional style recovered from the same nasal inhalation. They recovered, on average, about 50% faster than those with a negative emotional style. So it's studies like these that begin to show how our everyday thinking about stuff begins to exert a much deeper biochemical effect. The most profound effects of attitude is actually on the heart. One of my favorite studies, for its name, for the title of the study, and you'll realize in a minute why it's quite a cool title. A wee bit there? Right, is it popping? Ah, fantastic. Yeah, so one of my favorite studies, particularly for its name, the title, it's called Marital Conflict Relations and Coronary Artery Calcification, or CAC for short. It's when the coronary artery moves from having the internal consistency of a poached egg to something resembling plasterboard. So marital conflict relations and coronary artery calcification. You might be able to work out roughly what that study was about. Right? So scientists got together 150 married couples. And each couple was invited into a wee room. It was a nice room. Sofa, wee table, magazines, a plant, wee window. A video camera pointed at them. And they were asked for the next half hour to discuss topics from your marriage and family life. So what they want in these kind of studies is they want real behavior, real topics. So if it was done today, they might suggest you talk about things like household finances, vaccinations, the education of the children, what's going on in your relationship. They wanted to get a snapshot of how people behave when you're discussing real topics that you might disagree on. And they wanted to see what your attitude was, how you behave, and if there was any correlation on the heart. So they interviewed them, they let them talk for half an hour. They only used the last 5 minutes of tape. The reason being is, if you were in that study, the first 10 minutes you'd probably, aware there's a camera there, you'd probably be quite polite. and on your best behavior. After about 20 minutes, you forget the camera's there. So they only used the last 5 minutes because that's when security most often had to come into the room and break up the fights. So they watched all these 5-minute videotapes, and they began to put the individuals they began to grade them or score them according to their behavior. So for example, you might get a positive score for every time you said something warm, kind. Every time you listened, or you were tactile, you leant forward and maybe you touched your nearest and dearest on the arm, but you said something supportive or warm, you would get a negative score for every time you showed maybe contempt, hostility or aggression, something like, or anger, or clippedness, anything like that, you would get a negative. So they add up all the scores. And at one end of the extreme, you had the group who were defined as hostile and aggressive. So hostility was defined as expressed contempt. And males in that category tended to be bullies, hardened bullies. At the other end of the extreme, you had those who were defined as more gentle and compassionate, kind, and who really spoke and behaved from the heart. So you could say heart-centered, very soft people. And if you think of soft as the expression of love and kindness, versus hardened people, emotionally hardened. And one of the most amazing symmetries I have ever come across in science, and what I mean by a symmetry is when one thing is mirrored in something else. The group who were hostile, aggressive, who were hardened emotionally, they had high levels of coronary artery calcification, or CAC for short. The group who were heart-centered, who were soft, kind and compassionate, loving and gentle, they had very healthy arteries. And when you took out of the equation the effect of diet, lifestyle, who smokes, who drinks, stress, all that kind of stuff, the only difference was how you behaved. The only difference was attitude. And amazingly, living from the heart was actually keeping the arteries soft. Cutting yourself off from the heart was actually hardening the arteries. Isn't that astonishing? One of the main reasons for that is because every time you be kind, or you show emotional warmth, or compassion, or empathy, or affection, or love, whether it's in your mind, with your eyes closed, thinking about someone you love or an animal, recalling a time when you felt warm and connected, or anticipating, or whether you're actually in a physical situation where you are showing kindness or compassion or love, every single time, you turn a little tap in your arteries, and into your arteries floods a little hormone called oxytocin. Now, many women are familiar with oxytocin, men not so much. The reason being that oxytocin traditionally is known as a reproductive hormone. Many women, I think more than 50% of women in the world who are over their due date are actually given oxytocin because it initiates uterine contractions. The name oxytocin actually comes from the Latin for swift birth, because that's what it was traditionally used for, is to speed up the birthing process. Oxytocin also plays a key role in breastfeeding, in the letting down response of breast milk. That much has been known for a long time. What we now understand about oxytocin is it's called a cardioprotective hormone. It has major effects on the heart and the arteries in a protective way. The way that it does it is, so you show kindness or compassion, affection, warmth, gentleness, and you turn a little tap in your arteries, and the oxytocin floods through, and it begins to attach itself to little landing sites in your arteries. It's almost like parking bays. You know, you can go into a car park, and the parking bays are around the edges. In the arteries, the parking bays are around the edges as well. But they're not called parking bays, they're called receptors. So you have things called oxytocin receptors, meaning it's little parking bays that are receptive to oxytocin. That's what the word receptor means. If you ever hear that word in science, a receptor, it means it's receptive to something, usually a hormone. Oxytocin is a hormone. So oxytocin begins to park in its little landing sites, its little receptors, its parking bays that line the arteries. There are billions of them lining the arteries. And once that happens, the arteries start to squirt out a little substance called nitric oxide. Now, not nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas that you get at the dentist, but nitric oxide. And what nitric oxide does, the moment it gets into the arteries, your arteries go like that, and they expand. They even make that noise. They go, no, they don't really. But the arteries expand. It's called dilation of the arteries. And it happens very quickly when nitric oxide gets in the arteries. In fact, giving nitric oxide is actually a very basic technique, a very basic heart drug. In fact, people with angina get trinitroglycerin. Trinitroglycerin, meaning there's three nitros, and it's just a little thing you put under your tongue. It delivers nitric oxide into the arteries, and very quickly, the artery goes like that. Now, when an artery goes like that and widens, it means your heart doesn't have to push as hard to get the blood through. So the heart lets off some pressure. Doesn't have to work as hard. I can chill out a bit. So the heart eases off the pressure, which means blood pressure drops. So for that reason, oxytocin is called a cardioprotective hormone. It protects the arteries and the heart by reducing blood pressure. Another cardioprotective thing that it does is it also sweeps the crap out of the arteries. Now, crap, that's the technical name. For groups of substances, I call it the crap. It's groups of substances that collectively contribute to heart disease. Things like free radicals, inflammation, plaque, these kind of things, that generate a cardiovascular disease or heart disease that lead eventually to heart attack and stroke. And scientists did this wee experiment where they took cells from the arteries and from the immune system, and they put them under stress in the lab, and the stress was meant to simulate the conditions inside the body when we're stressed, whether it's mentally and emotionally, or even whether it is dietary, lifestyle stress. And very quickly they found a buildup of crap in the arteries, i.e. free radicals and inflammation. These are the two groups that principally play a big role in heart disease, free radicals and inflammation. And they found a buildup. But then they did the experiment again, put the same cells from the arteries and the same cells from the immune system under the stress in the lab. But this time they put a few drops of oxytocin in. The same oxytocin that you produce just by being kind, just by showing compassion or empathy or affection, emotional warmth. Anytime you lead from the heart, whether it's an actual physical expression of love or compassion or kindness, or whether it's just in your mind, as you remember a time when someone helped you out. You remember a time someone showed you compassion. You remember a time when you felt bonded with someone, when you did something kind. Or even you anticipate, you think about someone you love, and you think of why you love that person, and you think of why that person is important in your life. And every time you do that, you produce oxytocin. You turn the tap on, it goes into your arteries. And what they found was the levels of crap, free radicals and inflammation in the arteries substantially dropped. Substantially. I think up to 57% inflammation, up to 48% free radicals. Now, that is comparable with a drug, right? Just to give you a kind of ballpark. That's kind of comparable with some medicines. And it's amazing that the medicine that was doing that was oxytocin. And you generate it just by being kind, just by showing love and affection and compassion, whether in your head or in real life. And I say that whether in your mind or in your head or in real life for a reason, because it's the opposite to the way that we produce stress hormones in the body. You know, when you feel stressed, and I'll emphasize the word feel. When you feel stress, stress is a feeling. You feel stress. The feeling of stress is not dependent upon the situation. Let me give you an example. So let's say you've got to have a difficult conversation with your boss at work tomorrow, and you're anticipating that, and you're feeling stressed. The feeling has nothing really to do with the boss at work, because you could generate the same feeling from just remembering something else or thinking about a different situation. So you feel stressed. Now, the feeling produces inside the body what are called stress hormones. And the classical stress hormones are cortisol and adrenaline. Most people have heard of them, cortisol and adrenaline. They get produced because you feel stressed. And then they begin to affect the immune system, different parts of the body, the heart, arteries, in a more negative way, long term. So what I'm explaining here with oxytocin is when you feel warm and connected, which happens when you be kind, or when you show compassion, or love, warmth, or affection. When you feel that warmth, it might even be gratitude, a gratefulness. When you feel that way, rather than producing stress hormones, you don't produce stress hormones because you're not feeling stress. You're feeling warm, you're feeling connected. And that feeling turns on the tap that produces oxytocin, that produces nitric oxide, that leads to cleaning out to widening the arteries, dropping the blood pressure, and literally cleaning the crap out of the arteries. So it's amazing. This is an amazing demonstration of the mind-body connection. Imagine in a couple of years' time, Apple had developed an ability to shrink ultrasound imaging devices into an iPhone. And you say to your friends over dinner, check this out. Do you want to see me changing the shape of my blood vessel with my mind? My coronary artery? And they'll go, get out of here. What are you up to? No, check this out. And you open up the app for ultrasound imaging, you position it over your coronary artery. And you go, check this out. And you put the scan on, and it's showing a real-time scan of your coronary artery. You punch the screen to widen it up. And you say to your friends, check this out. And you close your eyes. And as soon as you close your eyes, they're going, idiot, lost the plot. Can't change the shape of your artery with your mind. And you close your eyes, a couple of minutes, and they're beginning to watch, and there's a wee ruler, a wee scale on the screen, and they're beginning to see your artery. After a few minutes, maybe a wee bit longer, and see your artery begin to widen. And it totally freaks them out. They think something supernatural is going on. They think somehow you've taken your mind and you've somehow integrated your consciousness with your arteries. I'm not saying that we can't do that. That's another topic altogether. But that's what they're thinking that's freaking them out. But in actual fact, all that's happened is you've just thought of someone you love. Or you've thought of a time when someone showed you kindness or compassion. Or when you showed someone kindness, and you're remembering the feeling of warmth and connection and gratefulness that felt. And by doing that, you're squirting oxytocin into your arteries and nitric oxide, and it's literally physically changing the shape of your arteries. And it's a beautiful demonstration of the mind-body connection, that you really can have this cardioprotective effect just by being kind. It also happens with animals. Do you know, there's a statistic based on some research that some integrative medicine institutes use, that some integrative medicine institutes suggest as a prescription for people, particularly males, who've had a heart attack, that they get a dog. And the reason being is the chances of a second heart attack in 1 year in someone who's had a heart attack already, if they have a dog, is 400% less. It's 400% less. Isn't that amazing? Now, traditionally, it was always assumed that was because of dog walking keeps you fit. You get lots of exercise. And of course, that absolutely contributes to it. But in actual fact, one of the significant factors, reasons for why having a dog reduces the chances of a second heart attack, is because of the production of oxytocin. Scientists did this wee experiment a few years ago, and they found, by studying people interacting with dogs, they found that oxytocin levels increased in the human and in the dog by about 1% a minute, up to about 20 minutes of the study. So in other words, what they found is after 20 minutes, there was about a 20% increase in oxytocin levels in the human and in the dog. If they're warmly interacting, like playing with the dog, tugging or rubbing the dog's neck, I would suspect you would see the same thing with a cat or a horse or a rabbit or any animal that you bond with. The study was done on dogs, only because traditionally the research was done because they assumed it was walking. You don't walk your cat, kind of thing. So they assumed that it was about dog walking. Hence, the studies have only been done on dogs. But I would guess you would generate oxytocin from stroking a cat or a horse or a rabbit or hugging a tree. And because hugging, it doesn't matter what you hug. It's a feeling of connection that generates the oxytocin. In fact, a study of 59 women asked them to keep a diary over a month of all the hugs that they experienced. Turned out the women who had counted the most hugs in that month had by far the highest levels of oxytocin in their blood. The women who had the lowest number of hugs had the lowest levels of oxytocin. And it was a straight line. More hugs directly translated to higher oxytocin. Given the fact that oxytocin is so good for the heart, you could really say a hug a day keeps the cardiologist away. But it's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. Other studies show that the cultivation of compassion, and in this research, when they're talking about the cultivation of compassion, they study people practicing the Tibetan Buddhist meditation known as the loving kindness meditation. And the loving kindness meditation goes like this. You start with yourself and you say, may I be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy and free of suffering. May I be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy, free of suffering. You do it 3 times for yourself, and then you think of someone you love. So it might be your daughter or your son or your husband or your wife or your best friend or your mum or your dad or whatever, or your dog or your cat or your horse. May, and you think of the person, be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy and free of suffering. And you do that 3 times. Then you do the same for someone who's neutral. Then you do the same for someone who's difficult person in your life. And then all sentient beings, all life. May all sentient beings be filled with loving kindness, and may they be well, peaceful and at ease, happy, free of suffering. You're building up a sentiment of love, kindness, and compassion. And scientists studying that meditation found that it exerts a highly specific effect on one portion of the nervous system known as the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve it does a lot of things. It's your rest and relax and regenerate part of the nervous system. But it also slows your heart rate. When you breathe in, your heart rate increases. And when you breathe out, your heart rate decreases. And the decrease is caused by your vagus nerve, putting your body into rest and relax. That's why your heart rate goes like that. When you do the ECG and it shows your heart, this is my pulse. It's not really, that's your average pulse. Your heart rate increases as you breathe in. As your body goes into fight or flight, so you're getting ready to run. It's called the sympathetic nervous system does that. Then when you breathe out, parasympathetic, your vagus nerve kicks in and slows it down. So when you get your pulse, it's your average between the high and the low. But what the vagus nerve also does is it's your primary brake on inflammation in the body. When I say primary brake, what I mean by drawing an analogy with a car. In the car, you have 2 brakes. You have your foot brake, which is a primary brake, and then you have your hand brake, which is your secondary brake. So in the body has a couple of different ways to deal with inflammation. We all know what inflammation is. You cut yourself, it gets inflamed. That inflammation is part of the immune response. It's vital for healing. But inflammation occurs on the inside of the body as well. You just can't see it in the arteries throughout the immune system, your joints. It's a side effect often of lifestyle, unhealthy lifestyle and stress, whether it's physical stress, psychological stress, or dietary lifestyle stress. And so inflammation occurs on the inside. And so your vagus nerve is your primary brake. It's your body's primary way of cleaning all that up and getting rid of it all. So the healthier the vagus nerve you have, they call it vagal tone. So like if you exercise, you have good muscle tone. So if you work out your vagus nerve, you say you have high vagal tone. It's the same kind of thing. So when you have high vagal tone, it means you've got a very good brake. It means your body can quite efficiently, more efficiently than average, deal with inflammation. And scientists studying the Tibetan Buddhist loving kindness meditation found that just after about 6 weeks of practice, it began to lift vagal tone and increase the body's capacity to deal with inflammation. And all you're actually doing is saying, may you be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy, free of suffering. And what that does is it causes you to feel. Remember again, when you feel stressed, the body produces stress hormones. When you feel warm and connected or grateful through kindness, you generate oxytocin rather than stress hormones, I call oxytocin and nitric oxide molecules of kindness because they're produced through kindness. But when you feel compassion, empathy and compassion, and the way they do it in research is through the Tibetan Buddhists, may you be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy, free of suffering. And feel compassion. It exerts that highly specific effect on your vagus nerve, and it tones up the vagus nerve. Other research then said, okay, that should produce a reduction in inflammation. It's exactly what it found. Scientists got a group of people to meditate doing the loving kindness for 6 weeks, and they measured inflammation. And amazingly, what they found is those who did the most loving kindness meditation, who'd built up the greatest feelings of compassion, had by far the lowest levels of inflammation in the body. So the body was actually healthier on the inside, simply because they'd said and generated that feeling of compassion through saying, may you be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy and free of suffering. And the key to it is the feelings that you generate. Just like feeling stressed generates stress hormones, feeling warm and connected through kindness generates oxytocin and nitric oxide, or molecules of kindness. And feeling compassion seems to tone up the vagus nerve like you would tone up a muscle through exercising it. So it's amazing that research, this is what I love about how science is beginning to move towards agreeing with all the stuff that we've kind of known about. A lot of the spiritual and holistic practices we've kind of known about for a long time. And for me, science is almost like a language. For me, I really use it as a bridge to open up this kind of stuff to people who would normally be skeptical or in the mainstream. Like even, I've spoken in banks, investment banks, for example, giving a talk on kindness, on how being kind and compassionate is healthy for the inside of the body. So I think it's great that all this kind of stuff exists. But it gets even better, because you can use your mind in a far more specific way. I mean, you can actually use this stuff already. You can say, wait a minute, if I want to have a healthy impact on my cardiovascular system, I'm going to start being more kind. And in particular, I'm going to be kind to such an extent that I feel warm and connected. So what does it take for me? What do I need to think? And how do I need to think? And that's the key. You've got to think you've got to think kindfully. That you've got to mean it. I call this nature's catch-22. You cannot get the cardiovascular benefits through kindness unless you mean it. You can't think, oh, well, that's great. I'm going to sort my heart out. I'm just going to go and give a couple of people £1, be nice, hug a couple of people. Because if you don't mean it, you're not going to get anything from it. The only way to generate oxytocin, the only way, is to mean it. Because you can't get the feeling. A feeling is produced by what you're doing. You can only get a feeling if you mean it. So you can only get the benefit if you mean it, if you're genuinely kind. So I call that nature's catch-22. But if you practice being genuinely kind, genuinely affectionate, and genuinely warm, whatever it takes for you, whether it's in your mind or physically, then you can start to give yourself, it's almost like saying, in some ways it's like saying, I'm going to eat a healthier diet. Or I'm going to start exercising. You're adding something else to this. Maybe you might think of this as an aspect of spirituality or a mental and emotional practice, as well as eating a healthier diet and exercising. You're having a healthier emotional heart and a mind of kindness. So I call this kindfulness. Instead of mindfulness, kindfulness. Get it in your head and be kind first, and then let your behavior follow the thinking, then only then can you really start to benefit from these. But it gets kind of better because you can have even more specific effects. In many ways, your brain can't tell the difference between real and imaginary. And you can use this concept for weird and wonderful effects. I'll give you an example. Scientists at Harvard, neuroscientists, did a study where they got a group of volunteers to play 5 notes on a piano. So they went plunk, 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 up and down a scale, 5 notes for 2 hours on 5 consecutive days. Now that's quite tiring. They don't really do 2 hours plunking. What you actually do, you go plunk, 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 for about a minute, then you rest for 2 or 3 minutes, then you go plunk, 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 plunk for a minute, then you rest for 2 or 3 minutes. But you do that on and off for a period of 2 hours. So let's say from 10 o'clock in the morning till 12 o'clock. And yet the instructions in this neuroscience experiment was you do that on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And every day, the scientists scanned the brains of the people playing the notes on the fingers. And they scanned particularly the region of the brain, it's called the motor cortex, the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles. And what they saw is that region of the brain began to grow like a muscle. And it's called neuroplasticity. It's the same word that describes why the brain physically changes when you meditate. When you go and you become mindful of the fact that you're breathing. The brain becoming thicker at the front is neuroplasticity. So with this, they found neuroplasticity by going plunk, plunk, plunk. And amazingly, the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles grew in size by 30 to 40 times. That's how much the brain can physically change. So that region had expanded by 30 to 40 times by the Friday. Now that's fair enough. A second group of people, instead of going plunk, 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 plunk with their fingers, they were asked to do it in their minds. So for the same 2 hours on 5 consecutive days, while one group went plunk, plunk, plunk with their fingers, this second group went plunk, 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 plunk in their minds. And they were asked to just imagine the feeling of moving your finger muscles. Imagine you're actually playing the notes and try to imagine the sound. So it's purely in their mind. And they also had to do it for 2 hours on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They also had their brain scanned every day. And the scientists, again, homed in on the regions of the brain connected to the finger muscles. And amazingly, it was exactly the same. The same region of the brain, and those who just imagined playing the notes, had also grown like a muscle by a factor of 30 to 40 times. And when you look at the brain scans of those who played the notes with their fingers and put them side by side with the brain scans of those who played the notes with their mind and mix them up, you cannot tell the difference. In other words, the brain, in many ways, does not make a distinction between whether you're doing something and physically or whether you're doing it in your mind. The brain, in many ways, does not make a distinction between real and what you're imagining to be real, which is an amazing thing. Now, that has not escaped the attention of other scientists. Groups of scientists said, well, wait a minute. Playing the notes with the fingers, the muscles would become stronger. But would those who imagine playing the notes, would their muscles get stronger? So lots of research teams around the world have been experimenting. One of my favorite pieces was done at the Lerner Institute for Mechanical Engineering. And they got a group of volunteers to do a version of the piano study, but just with one little finger. So they were asked to go like that and flex the little finger. Right? For 15 minutes, Monday to Friday, for 3 months. What a study that is, eh? Imagine you were asked to do that. Now, that's actually quite tiring, though. So what you really do is you flex it for 15 seconds, and then you rest it for 20 seconds. Then you flex for 15, then you rest for 20. You flex for 15 seconds, you rest. But you do that, flexing and resting, for a period of 15 minutes on the clock. And they were asked to do that Monday to Friday for 3 months. Now, at the beginning of the study, and after the 3 months, they had their strength tested. So they had to put their fingers in a machine and lift a wee set of weights to see if they'd got any stronger. Now, unsurprisingly, after 3 months of flexing your little finger, the average improvement in strength was 53%. Now, that's fair enough, because you are actually exercising, of course you are. So guess what the other group had to do? Exactly, in their heads. So for the same 15 minutes on the clock, Monday to Friday for 3 months, they went like that. And just imagined the flexing the fingers. And they also had their strength tested at the beginning of the study and after the 3 months. They also put their finger in a wee machine and lifted a wee set of weights to see how strong they were. Now, amazingly, the average improvement in strength was 35%, and they hadn't even lifted a finger. Yeah. Now, someone skeptical once said to me, well, the group who flexed their finger, it was 53%. The group who imagined it, it was only 35. And I pointed out, but it wasn't zero. It wasn't zero. Here you have a 35% improvement in strength, and you literally have not actually lifted a finger. See if you couldn't be bothered going to the gym. Hey, you could lie in your bed on a Saturday morning in your mind. Just imagine you're on the cross trainer or the thing. And this sounds kind of out there, but this is actually scientific fact. It's actually scientific fact that in many ways, the brain can't distinguish real from imaginary. Now, that has not escaped clinical attention. A raft of studies have taught that visualization technique. We call it visualization in the kind of holistic field, but in science, you can't use that word because you can't get funding to do your studies. So you have to call it motor imagery. You can get away with mental imagery. You can also get some funding if you use biologically targeted imagery, because it sounds sciencey, doesn't it? But if you use visualization, you can't really get funding, so you don't see many visualization studies. But there's plenty of mental imagery studies, guided imagery studies, motor imagery studies, and biologically targeted imagery studies. But when I say visualization, that's what I mean. So, typical study, people have had a stroke. And some studies have people have recently had a stroke. Some studies, it's like 10. In fact, one study 14 years ago, a couple of people had had a stroke. And everyone gets a 6-week course in physiotherapy. One group, as well as getting the physiotherapy, they also do about half an hour a day, 3 or 4 times a week, in their head, imagining, visualizing movement. So, for example, they might imagine taking a drink from a bottle of water. So they would imagine, they would, in their mind's eye, so if they had impairment to the right side and they couldn't move, they had limited use of the right arm. So in their mind's eye, they would imagine reaching from a bottle, taking a drink, putting it back down. Reach for the bottle, drink, put it back down. In their mind's eye, imagining reaching for the bottle, drink, put it back down. Reach, drink, put it back down. Reach, drink, put it. Using what I call the 3 rules of mental practice. Rule 1, repetition. Rule 2, repetition. Rule 3, repetition. The 3 rules of mental practice. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So in their mind's eye, over and over again. And they also maybe, one study had people imagining eating an apple. Had to pick the apple up because you're using your impaired limb. Another study, or part of it, had people imagining turning the pages of a book as if they're reading a book. Again, using the impaired limb. Now, all of these studies, what they show is those who do the visualization, the physiotherapy plus the visualization, or the mental or motor imagery, they recover far more in the 6-week period than those who just do the physiotherapy. So the ideal combination is physiotherapy plus visualization. Is far better than just physiotherapy on its own. They found the same thing for Parkinson's patients, also for people with spinal cord injuries, if it's not a complete severance of the spinal cord. So amazing, exciting studies. It's not escaped sports attention. Almost all elite athletes use visualization to enhance their performance. In fact, I know that for a fact. I used to be an athletics coach. I was the manager of the under-20 men's team of a club called Sale Harriers in Manchester between 1996 and 1999. So I was a long jumper myself. I used to run and do the long jump and do the 200 meters as well. And so I became a coach and a manager. And during that time, we had 8 athletes in the Olympics. And you start to hear what elite athletes are doing. And I actually spoke at a conference a few years ago, and I was right after an Olympic gold medalist, Sally Gunnell, who many of you might remember. Sally Gunnell won the Olympic gold medal for the 400 hurdles back in the 90s. And Sally said during her presentation, which was literally right before me, at this corporate conference event, and she said 70% of winning the Olympic gold medal is mental. And a large part of that was a daily dose of visualization. So every single day, without exception, In her mind's eye, she'll hear the gun, the starter gun, and she'll imagine getting off the blocks, running high knee lift, come to the first hurdle, clear the hurdle, leg down fast, other leg over fast, and run. Next hurdle, leg up, over, down fast. And in her mind's eye, running the whole race and getting to the really hard bit is the last 50 meters when you're exhausted. And in her mind's eye, knowing that you're exhausted at that point, you still lift your legs. So in her mind's eye, she was imagining still being able to lift your knees high. That's key for an athlete. When I used to coach, I used to say, it's better to have a high knee lift, because if your knees are not very high, then you're not covering very much ground for the same effort. But if you can lift your knees higher, for the same effort, you'll cover more ground. You have a larger stride. So it's very difficult in the last 50 meters of a 400 meters or a 400 hurdle. So in her mind's eye, she was imagining lifting her knees up. And when she gave the talk, she showed the video afterwards. And you saw her pulling away from everyone to win the Olympic gold medal. And she mentioned, look at my knees. And you could see her, she was lifting her knees like that. And she said 70% of winning Olympic gold medal is mental, and a large part of that was visualization. And it works because your brain can't tell the difference between whether you're actually doing it or whether you're doing it in your mind. So that's amazing. So just imagining something changes the physical structure of the brain. And then that begins to impact different parts of the body with almost surgical precision. And when I say surgical precision, research that was done at the Karolinska Institute, which is really famous. It's where Nobel Prize winners in medicine and physiology give their lectures. And they found that if you were to just put your attention on any part of the body, you stimulate that part of the body as if you're really touching it. So if I put my attention on my fingertip, and you were to scan my brain, and another time I touched my fingertip or moved my finger to the brain, it would be exactly the same. And so you could look at a map of the brain, a bit like a reflexology map. You know the reflexology maps with the heart, the kidneys, and all that. So in the brain, it's very similar. And this wee map is called the homunculus. And it looks literally, homunculus means like a little person. And it looks like a little person really all stretched out. And what you find is if you just put your attention anywhere in the body, in my big toe, my tongue, back of your head, your ear, it immediately lights up the part of the brain that you're thinking about, immediately, as if you're actually moving it. And research at the University of Turin School of Medicine, led by a guy called Fabrizio Benedetti. He's probably one of the leading researchers in the mind-body connection or the placebo effect. And he did this great experiment. He got volunteers to participate in a pain challenge. How much pain can you take? You can guess the dominant sex involved in that study who volunteered. So this group of a few dozen men had a pain challenge meant how much, by the present company accepted, of course. So they said the pain challenge was how much pain can you take? So the challenge was an injection of chili oil into your hands or your feet, right? Chili oil into your hands or your feet. The substance is called capsaicin. But it's basically red-hot chili oil. If you squeeze the oil out of chili, it's mostly capsaicin. Now, put that in a syringe and inject it into your hand. You know what it feels like if you touch your eye or another part of your anatomy? You're almost in tears. So imagine getting it injected into your hands or your feet. So each person had to rate their level of pain from 0 to 10. So most people's level of pain was 12, right? As you would expect. But then they did another experiment. They said, they were getting paid for the study, by the way. That's how you get people to participate on things when it might be painful. And they said, right, we're going to do it again, but this time on, let's say, the left hand. And they varied it in some people the left, some people at the right, different feet. And they said, so for example, on the left hand, before the injection, we're going to give you a local anesthetic. And we believe this will be a blockbuster. A blockbuster in the pharmaceutical industry means a drug whose annual sales are greater than $1 billion a year. Right? That's when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, that's what we called a blockbuster, if your annual sales top $1 billion a year. So in the study they're saying, we think this will be a blockbuster. This is such a powerful local anesthetic that we rub it on your hand, and within a few seconds, it completely gives you a neutralization effect of pain. You know, like a dental injection works within, so keep clicking this, works within, 10, 20 seconds, a minute or something. So they said, this will be amazing. We really believe this will be awesome. And you should have no pain at all. And so, and the way you build up this kind of effect is you make sure that the person saying those words has a white coat on, wears glasses, administer it from a brown bottle. I'll explain why in a minute. And amazingly, so they get the local anesthetic on the left hand, but not on the right. Then they get the injection of chili oil in both hands. Level of pain in the right hand, as usual, 12 out of 10. Level of pain in the left hand, almost none. Thinking, whoa, this local anesthetic is amazing. In actual fact, it was oil of Yule or some other similar moisturizing cream. But they so believed that it was a local anesthetic. And this is why I say researchers can amplify the placebo effect, i.e. make it more likely to see a placebo effect if you wear a white coat, because that conjures up the effect of a doctor. Glasses are useful, best if you're over the age of 40 with a wee bit of greying hair. That's why I dye my hair grey. And it helps if you use a brown bottle, because as children, we always have that memory of medicines always coming from brown bottles. Right? And another little trick you use is you dab the bottom of the bottle with antiseptic or TCP, so that when you walk into the room, they get this whiff of antiseptic. So the mind immediately assumes, puts 2 and 2 together and gets 5. But get this. So they had 12 out of 10 pain in the right, but no pain in the left. Then they scanned the brain. And amazingly, with surgical precision, the brain had actually produced its own natural version of morphine, specifically on the left-hand region of the brain and nowhere else in the brain. Isn't that amazing? With surgical precision, so you've got the left-hand region of the brain and the right-hand region of the brain right beside each other. And the right-hand region of the brain has no morphine, and yet the left-hand region has a big dose of morphine being produced. In other words, the mind, belief itself, produced what's called, as I said at the start, an endogenous opiate. I.e. morphine is an opiate. An endogenous opiate is one that's endogenous to the body. It belongs to the body. Endorphin, for example. And amazingly, this endogenous morphine was produced with surgical precision exactly in the region of the brain corresponding to the left hand. So in other words, wherever you place your attention, not only do you impact the part of the body you're focusing on, but you impact with precision the specific region of the brain corresponding to that. So I think this kind of stuff's amazing. And it got me interested. For years and years, I've been interested in what do people use visualization for? And I've met thousands of people who've used visualization to overcome illness, disease, or injury. And amazingly, they all do exactly the same thing in their mind. And when I say exactly the same thing, what I mean is they take a mental idea of illness, and they turn that mental idea of illness into wellness in their mind. They take a mental idea of illness and they turn it into a mental idea of wellness. So illness converted into wellness. And they do it in their minds. And they employ the 3 rules of mental practice. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Over and over and over again. I'll give you a few examples, right? So the most frequently used visualization that I know of for people who had cancer and were getting chemotherapy is they imagined the chemo drugs like little piranha fish or Pac-Man going and nibbling the tumor. So in their mind's eye, the tumor illness is now being nibbled away. And it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the little piranha fish nibble away, smaller and smaller and smaller, till it's gone. So in their mind's eye, wellness is tumor's gone. Illness, having the tumor. Wellness, there's no tumor there anymore. How they got to it was little piranha fish. But people get to that in lots of different ways. The most frequently used visualization used by people who had radiotherapy is they imagined the radiation like bolts of lightning going pa-choom, 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 boom, 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 blowing chunks out of the tumor. Just like you remember back in the 80s when Space Invaders, the first computer games, and you got the little Space Invaders would go across the top of the screen like that. And then they would fire down a wee bullet, and you had these wee bases you could hide behind. And if you hid behind a base, the bullet came in and it blew a big chunk out the base. Right? So that's the radiotherapy visualization people use is imagine the radiation blowing chunks out the tumour, like that. So in their mind's eye, the tumour is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's gone. Some people imagine tumours melting like they're ice, snowballs on a hot stove, kind of thing. I know a lady who had a large tumour in her abdomen, and her friends had said, you need to get that effing thing out, and it was telling her to blow out grenades and guns and all this violence. And she thought, I don't want it, violence. I don't want to use violence in my body. So she decided she was a healer. And she thought, well, I'm going to do something different. So she imagined herself inside her body, looking at the tumor, which to her, in her imagination, looked like a hill. And the hill was made up of little smiley faces, which were the cancer cells. And in her mind's eye, in her imagination, she addressed all the cancer cells and she said, I love you very much. And I just want to say, thank you. Thank you for coming into my life. Because I've actually changed a lot. I've realized a lot of things about myself, and I've decided what I want to do in my life and what I want to stop in my life and where I want to go. So I've decided to live. So I'm asking you now to leave. Are you okay with that? And she imagined all the wee cancer cells going, oh, we love you too. And if you want us to go, we're happy to go. And in her imagination, she imagined the little cells climbing now off the hill. So as they're climbing off the hill, the hill, i.e. the tumour, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And they're now getting on a bus. And when they were all packed on the bus, the little bus drove away. And as the bus was driving away, all the little cancer cells were waving at the window. Bye, bye. And the bus drove out of the body and away. People with cardiovascular disease, imagine going through their arteries with a steam cleaner, cleaning them out. People with arthritis, imagine sandpapering their joints and filling them with massaging oil into the joints. People with eyesight trouble, imagine lenses becoming more flexible, muscles massaging eye muscles. People with, I've got a friend actually who had an autoimmune conditions like MS, diabetes 1, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. They have a similarity in the sense that the immune system is attacking the body. And he had a condition called myasthenia gravis. And it was where the immune system attacks a little substance in the brain that's got to get from there to there. And he'd got really seriously ill, and he was being treated by a GP who was running a workshop. Initially, he was told that there's nothing we can do. This is you now, I think was the phrase. This is you now. We can treat your symptoms, but we can't. It's an incurable condition, is what he was told. And he decided to look for some alternative approach. And he started to study something called vibrational medicine, a bit like homeopathy. And it was being actually taught by a GP who was also doing alternative stuff as well as traditional, more what you call an integrative medicine kind of practitioner. And he collapsed at the workshop, really seriously ill. She decided he was too sick to travel, so took him home to her own house and tended him as a patient. And he started to recover. And one day he was in Plascarden Abbey in Fife listening to Gregorian chants. And all of his symptoms spontaneously disappeared. And he was listening to these beautiful sounds, and all of a sudden, his breathing's fine, and his face is working. When I first met Drew, he used to have to hold his face up. He was like that, because his whole face had collapsed, and he was trying to get the muscles working. He had to hold his face up. But yet he was symptom-free. And it was like a spontaneous remission. And the symptoms came back over the next few days. But one thing changed in his mind, and what changed is, I don't accept I accept the diagnosis, myasthenia gravis, but I don't accept the prognosis, i.e. how it's going to be. Maybe medicine has only says it's incurable because we've not reached the point of curing it. But 50 years ago, if we'd have looked at what we cure now, this would look like Harry Potter, the things we can do now, compared to 100 years ago or 50 years ago. So Drew said, who's to say that in a generation from now, we won't be able to cure myasthenia gravis with a tablet, and that we just don't understand it. So he decided, I'm going to find a way. There must be a way. If I can be symptom-free listening to Gregorian chants, then there must be a way. So that's when we met, and he came to one of my workshops when I do a full-day version of this. And we did an exercise where everybody has to figure out a visualization for something you're dealing with, or something you know that a friend or a family member is dealing with. And he came up with a visualization where he, in his mind's eye, he could see the immune system like piranha fish attacking the little substance. So in his mind's eye, he took a child's fairground pop gun and he shot it in the bum. Shot the immune system, the piranha, in the bum. He wasn't using an Uzi 9mm. I always caution against the use of violence in your own mind. So in his mind's eye, he saw the piranha, the immune system, about to gobble the chemical. He shot it in the bum and it went like that, distracted it so the little chemical could swim to the other side. And every day, he said, sometimes for an hour a day, he lay in his mind, in his imagination, just as like you're shooting the ducks at the fairground with corks. But what he's doing instead of the ducks is he's shooting piranha fish, i.e. the immune system that's attacking this chemical. Anyway, he did this for 11 months and took vibrational medicine supplements for 11 months. He was discharged by his consultant at Nine Wells Hospital in Dundee with the line, Mr. Pride, his name is Mr. Pride, Mr. Pride, you are the only person I have ever heard of who has completely recovered from myasthenia gravis. Now, that was 12 years ago. Drew and I are still friends. He's still symptom-free. And that's all he did was visualization plus vibrational medicine supplements. So it was an amazing thing. And when I'm talking about, that was purely an alternative, when I'm talking about visualization, I'm not meaning instead of taking medical advice. You know, common sense says, use whatever medical advice you're getting, but use your mind as well. Not instead of. I'm not advocating that we just say, oh, screw all that healthy lifestyle, screw medicine. I'm just going to meditate on a pole and that'll be me, visualize it all away. I don't think that's very sensible. I think whatever it is, whatever interventions you're going through, use your mind as well as. Just like people who had a stroke, who recovered really much faster, they got physiotherapy plus visualization, not instead of. Visualization on its own wouldn't be as good as physiotherapy plus visualization. So whatever advice we're taking, you're using the advice, but you're using your mind as well as to enhance whatever it is you're doing. In some cases, people visualizing, depending on what it is, probably are able to exert a considerable effect in and of itself. But I think sensible tells us that whatever we're doing, we use your mind as well as it. So people use this for all manner of things, even mental health issues. A guy years ago who had depression had suffered really terrible depression, and his friend suggested, why don't you visualize? How do you visualize depression? He thought, I don't know what to do. And he thought, well, it's not a physical thing. So he thought, well, what if I just imagine it as a symbol? See, the brain works symbolically. And I'll explain what I mean. He said, he told us at the workshop he came to, he said, I felt broken. If I remember rightly, I think he used to be he had a good job, and his marriage had broke up, he'd turned to alcohol, he'd lost his house, he ended up in a bedsit in Bradford, I think, if I remember right. This was like more than 10 years ago. And he said, I felt broken. So he pictured in his mind the brokenness like a mirror that had been dropped on the ground and was shattered. And that was to symbolize how he felt. So he said, my brokenness was now symbolized in the brokenness of the mirror. So in his imagination, he took a brush and pan and he swept it up. And he swept up the shards until he'd swept up all the shards of broken mirror. He then put them in a cauldron and he lit a fire under the cauldron and he melted the shards of mirror until it was liquid silver. And then he imagined a brand new mold on the ground, and he poured the cauldron, the liquid mirror, the liquid silver, into the mold, and he reset it, and he blew on it until it hardened into a mirror, and he held it up, and he'd made himself whole again. So in his imagination, he took a broken mirror, and he turned it into a whole mirror, meaning he took his brokenness, and he made himself whole again. So using the same concept of illness, converted in your imagination to wellness, illness was a broken mirror, and wellness was a whole mirror. And he did it every single day. He said, some days I struggled because when you're feeling depressed, you feel there's no hope. But the key with him is he created the visualization for himself. Someone didn't tell him to do it. He created it for himself, and he said that gave him some hope. And he did it every day. And he said, after a couple of months, I literally was a new man. Literally, he was completely recovered. And this had been several years ago before we actually met, and he'd never had a relapse of depression. And all he did was take illness, convert it into wellness. But because it wasn't a physical thing, he symbolized it with a broken mirror, which became a whole mirror. So you can apply this idea of illness becomes wellness to whether it's a physical thing or a non-physical thing. The key, though, is the 3 rules of mental practice. Remember what they are? Repetition, repetition, repetition. And what that tells me, I think what's happening is it's going through a neuroplasticity process in the brain. And that's just my own theory. Scientists haven't got as far as testing exactly why this works. But my own hypothesis is the fact that people have to do it over and over and over again tells me that it's going through a neuroplasticity. So the brain is physically changing in structure. And at some point, the bit of the wiring in the brain that says, I'm well, is now bigger and stronger than the wiring in the brain that says, I'm sick or I'm ill. And I think when that happens, it's almost like there's a wee tipping point in the body. And the body starts to move in the direction of wellness instead of being staying at illness. Whether that causes a change in the immune system or is stimulating specific parts of the body, scientists haven't really, buttoned it down as to exactly how it works. But based on all my understanding of the mind-body connection, I think that's what happens, is the brain somehow must be wiring in the idea of illness. And if we keep doing it, then that wiring gets stronger and stronger. Well, I want to teach you a meditation. I call it quantum field healing, because we've still got some time left. And with quantum field healing, what we do, so it's a visualization technique that we do illness and we convert it into wellness. But rather than just something physical, because you know how to do that now, this is, a different version. We're still going to do the illness to wellness version, but we're going to do it at the level of the quantum field in our mind. So in our mind's eye, we'll take ourselves into the part of the body we want to work on, into the cells, into the DNA in the center of the cell, into the atoms. Take our imagination to the particles, the protons, neutrons, electrons, croutons, and morons. Well, there isn't any croutons and morons, and then down to the quantum field, which you can picture as waves of energy. And then what we do is we imagine waves of illness, and we convert them into waves of wellness. So it's still illness to wellness, but instead of doing it in a physical thing, we're imagining the waves of energy where it all starts from, and imagining changing the waves of illness into the waves of wellness. And so that it takes about 10 minutes to do the visualization. And I'll tell you why I came up with it, because years ago I was interested in spontaneous remissions. And I'd studied lots of research where people had a spontaneous remission, where, it might be from something serious or not so serious. And a spontaneous remission means a very rapid healing or recovery where there's no known scientific explanation based on current understanding of science. And it's called a spontaneous remission. And some of them happen really fast. And I'd also been interested in what's now called dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality. And that can happen when, at a very young age, someone is badly treated, and as a way to cope, they create different personalities. And as an adult, the personalities are still there, and what happens is you have distinct personalities. So it's now called dissociative identity disorder. And with these different personalities, you can have distinct biochemistry in the sense that one can have an allergy and the other one might not be. There's a well-known case where one personality was drinking orange juice, and then the personality in the psychiatrist's office flicked to the personality that was allergic to orange juice, and they came up in hives really quickly. And then the psychiatrist was able to talk them into the other personality, and right in front of his eyes, all the hives disappeared again. Now, the amount of biological changes required to make hives appear and then disappear that fast is mind-blowing, but yet it happened in a short time. And I was interested in that. And also, I know someone who said that sometimes when you go to groups of people who have dissociative identity disorder, she had someone in the family, sometimes as personality switches, you see a switch in eye tone, color. I'm not saying from blue to brown, or brown to blue, anything like that. But within the spectrum of brown or the spectrum of blue, as a personality changes, you can sometimes see a tiny little tonal change in blue, or a tonal change in green, or a tonal change in brown. That's amazing. And so with different personalities, you have unique beliefs and worldviews. And what that demonstrates is a deep belief about identity can go right to the core of your biology and cause these remarkable shifts. So I've been researching that through the literature, and I thought the body's capable of amazing things. We must be able to tap into it. Must be a way. And for days I was racking my brains. How do you tap into that latent capacity? And I figured, what if you can take your mind out of the idea that something is seemingly solid and replace that with an idea that it's really empty, that there's nothing there. Waves of energy. And I wondered if that would be enough of a hook that would, for some people, reach into deep, their belief would reach deep into the recesses of the body. And I hadn't really done anything with that idea, but as luck would have it, a situation presented itself that focused my mind on doing this. Friends and I had founded a charity back in 2001 called Spirit Aid Foundation. It's still a really thriving charity based in Glasgow. I'm not part of it anymore, but we created it back in 2001. And a lady had joined the charity, a lovely, lovely lady. And the name Spirit Aid had attracted people who had an interest in healing in the spiritual things and the healing arts. Hence, the name Spirit Aid would naturally attract that. Because the charity was about the human spirit and kindness. And it was to help children around the world whose lives had been affected by war and poverty. So it was about kindling the human spirit for kindness and compassion. So most of the volunteers at that time were practicing healers and therapists. We had Reiki masters, we had Sikhem practitioners, we had massage therapists. Everyone had a healing spiritual art. And this lady had joined, and she hadn't heard of anything like that before. And we were sitting one morning during morning tea break, and one of the ladies was talking about a healing she did the night before. And and that caused the group to swap stories of healings. And they said, if you put your hand position at the back of the neck or at the base of the back, you get this warmth. And they were talking about all this, like we're all defining themselves as healers. And this lady's going, wow. She'd never heard of a healer. Outside of the only context she had for the word healer was from the Bible or the American charismatic. You've got 2,000 people in the auditorium and the charismatic preacher, and you've got a row of wheelchairs, and they go, "Praise the Lord!" And they touch the head, and the person gets out the wheelchair and walks across the stage. So in her mind, she's thinking that's what we do. Because the only context she had for the word healer was the American charismatic or the miracles of the Bible. She was devout Catholic. So you can see why she thought that. And get this, she thought that I was the super duper master healer. Because I had been one of the initial seeds that created the genesis of what became Spirit Aid Foundation. So she got this idea that I was this elevated super being. And it went even further because some of the ladies were talking about reincarnation in past lives. And do you think we've all been together in a past life? And they were talking about Atlantis and all that. And so what she'd done is put two and two together and then assumed that we are these super beings, but I am the leader. And I'm this elevated super duper being who literally walks around just healing people. And I thought, I need to correct her and explain, everybody does healing nowadays. I mean, you get trained in Reiki in a fortnight. In fact, every man and his dog now does Reiki, isn't it? In fact, my 2 doors down from me, my neighbour's dog's Reiki too. But I suppose back in 2001, it wasn't quite as popular as it is now. So the only context she had was miracles kind of thing. And I thought, I'm going to explain to her that she can do healing. There's nothing, because I basically wanted to say, look, there's nothing special about me. I'm just Joe Bloggs. It's not my name, but I'm just Joe Bloggs. But we're all just ordinary people who have, can think in different ways. I wanted her to feel that she could do anything like this. But I totally forgot because we got really busy in the charity. Anyway, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 weeks later, she came in and she had this terrible cold. In fact, it might even have been the flu. She walked in the door, her face was white, and her eyes were all black and puffy, and she was standing like that. And that's the day when I discovered that there's a right and a wrong way to communicate with women. As I said, "Oh, you look shocking." I've since learned a better way to communicate. But this was 2001. And I was backpedaling. I don't mean you look shocking. What I mean is, compared to yesterday, I mean, your eyes, no, I mean, you look great. But, you know, what I'm trying to say is, but it turned out, she said, "Oh, I feel really terrible." You know, she said, "My bones are cold." She was shivering, my bones. You know that time, if you feel like the flu, a really bad cold, you could put 5 jackets on and 2 quilts and lie in bed and you're still shivering. And that's what she was like. And she looked, I mean, she really, and I said, "Oh, you need to go home. You can't possibly work. Please go home. In fact, take the week off. At the very least, take the day off." And the next line was, it demonstrated how much compassion she has. And she said, "Oh, I just want to help the Waynes." You know, for the non-Scottish people listening, Waynes is the Scottish word for children. So it was a children's charity, i.e. for the Waynes. That's just our word for children. "Oh, I just want to help the Waynes. I'm working on if I make a few phone calls today, I really think that I can make a difference in this one child's life. And if I can make that little bit of difference, then I don't mind feeling like this if I can make a difference today." And I thought, "Oh, what a beautiful person." And we were lucky to have someone like that, and most of the team were very compassionate like that. Anyway, the thought popped into my head, she thinks I'm this elevated, super-duper archangel being thing, walking about in physical form. I wonder if I could play along. See what happens. So I thought, I'm just going to be really casual with this. So I went, "Do you fancy a wee healing?" And I don't even walk like this, you know. She's thinking, "Who's the crazy person?" No. "Would you fancy a wee healing?" And she's going, "Oh, no, I'll be fine. You know, we're all martyrs in Scotland, by the way. No, I'll be fine. Fine." I go, "No, please, let me gift you a healing. You do such a great job for us. Please let me gift you a healing." "Oh, you sure? Oh, that is so kind. I can't believe I'm getting a healing. Oh, me, I'm getting a healing." Oh. And it was so overwhelming for her because the only context she has is the miracles from the Bible or the American charismatic. So now her thinking she's getting a healing, it's almost too much. "Oh, I'm getting a healing. Oh, my God, I'm getting a healing. Oh, my God, I'm getting a healing. Oh, dear God, I'm getting a healing. Oh, my God." And so I'm thinking, this is good. She's done it. And I thought, I stole a line from the Bible. And I said, "Do you believe that I can do this?" She goes, "Oh, I've heard the stories." Don't know what stories. She had nothing to do with me. Someone else, presumably, but nothing to do with me. And so I'm walking up, and I'm starting to work on her belief. And she said, "Oh, will this not drain all your energy?" And I'm going, "No, I've been working up to this for a fortnight." Bursting with energy. Literally, it's pulsing out my fingertips. Absolutely raring to go here. "Are you sure?" Damn it, I'm ready to go. And then I said, "And as you know," I'm building up her belief here. I said, "As you know, it only takes a second." Because in her head, that's what she thinks. So "As you know, it only takes a second." "Oh, thanks very much." And you know, sometimes you're playing a role so well that you kind of forget that you're just playing a role. And before I could stop the words coming out of my mouth, I said, "I'm going to put my hands on your head." And before I could stop my mouth, I said, "You might feel a wee jolt." And as luck would have it, a bolt of lightning shot right at my... No, it didn't really. No. But as luck would have it, I totally remembered a time in my life when I got an electric shock. And it was like a jolt. Friends and I was 18. We were at first year university, had hired a cottage in somewhere down the west coast of Argyll, Machrihanish, Campbelltown, Scotland. And it was March, and I'd been stupid. I'd fallen in the seawater by just clowning around in the rocks, trying to dance and all that. I fell in the water, saturated, and it was freezing. It was Scotland, howling wind. We were walking home, and we took a shortcut. It was like a mile or two to the cottage we were living in. And we took a shortcut over this fence. And now, just to put this into context, anyone who knows anything about the science of electrochemistry will understand that you can pass an electric current through a toilet roll if you soak it in salt water. It's called a salt bridge, because electricity is the flow of electrons. As long as you've got salt and water there, loads of salt in the water, you can pass electricity through a toilet roll and light a bulb. So I'm Mr. Lightning Conducting Rod. The reason I'm telling you that, we discovered that the fence was actually an electric fence. I had thin insulate gloves on, because it was cold. Climbed over the fence, boom, and I fell about 5 feet off this wall, landed on my back. I'm going, and my friend Stuart was on his hands and knees, crying with laughter. I was looking for empathy. He was literally on the ground, tears. Apparently never seen anything so funny in his life. Anyway, that night we were all drinking our beers in the cottage, and they were saying, what was it like? I'm saying, to be real honest, it was like someone puts their hand on your head and pushes your skin up really fast, like that. Anyone had an electric shock? It's like that. It's like someone pushes your skin, but does it really fast, like that. And we were all sitting drinking our beers, going like that. I'm saying, that's what it's like. It's like a wee jolt like that. So as luck would have it, I remembered how to fake a jolt. So without really losing my cool, I said, I put my hand on your head, you might feel a wee jolt, momentary lapse, and then remembering, I put my hand on her head, pushed her skin up really fast, and I just blurted out the first word that popped into my mind. I just went, cold cancel. And she went, oh. And I'm thinking, what is she doing? I thought, I bet she's seen it on the telly. That's what you do. Anyway, she goes like that. Whew, 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 my God. Whew, whew, whew. And she's 100%. I was kind of, in my mind, I was kind of going for 25% by 5 o'clock, you know. That was about 5 seconds. Literally 100%, and she's going like that. The rest of the day, she's typing on the computer, she's on the phone, she's making the tea, buttering the toast, she's full of energy the whole day. Never done anything at all. I went to the toilet, locked the cubicle door, and sat in there for a quarter of an hour, trying to work out exactly what had just happened there. And what it taught me is that the power of belief, the power of the mind is extraordinary. I am no special person. I'm not a special elevated being. We all, if that is true, then it's true for all of us. We all have that capacity. And what happened there is her belief was somehow so pure and so strong, it reached so far down inside her body, and probably just, like her immune system was like an erupting volcano that literally wiped out the cold in about 5 seconds. If someone told me that, I probably wouldn't have believed them. As a scientist, I probably wouldn't have believed them, but that actually happened. And it was that night I thought, right, I'm going to really work on this. We must be able to tap into it. And that's where the idea for quantum field healing came. If you could take someone's mind away from the feeling that something is solid, even a disease condition is somehow solid, and maybe reframe that. If you think of what it would be like as a particle in the quantum field, then it's just a wave of energy. And the idea that a wave can be changed is much easier to get your head around than something solid. So the whole belief, the whole reason for quantum field healing is, could we reframe something that you think is solid and think it's just waves of energy? And would that be enough for some people's mind to go, yep, I can do this? And would that be enough to reach far enough inside the body and jiggle about with the biology enough to cause a very profound healing effect? So do you want to give it a try? It only takes 10 minutes. So we've got some nice dolphin music that we're going to play, which is nicely appropriate for this. And I'll just guide you through it. Now, when you do this, you can pick you can do it for something that you're personally dealing with, or you can imagine sending this to someone like a prayer. Like you would say a prayer for someone you know. So you might even think of doing it for someone else like a prayer. If that was the case, then imagine you're asking their permission, as if you're talking to their soul and saying, is this okay? Would you like me to offer this healing? So just start by closing your eyes. And bring your attention to the sound of your breath. What does it sound like when you breathe? What does it feel like when you breathe? The sound of your breath, the sensations of breathing, relaxing your body and your mind. And now take your attention to the part of the body that you want to work on, and imagine that you're inside that part of the body. And imagine what that would be like. Now, we all imagine in our own way. Some people are quite visual. Some people it's more a feeling. Some other people imagine by even pressing something with their hands to see how it feels like. But we all imagine in our own way. However you imagine, you are doing this correct, because we all imagine in our own way. You can only do it right. And imagine now that you're way inside that part and you're face to face with the cells. And imagine what these cells would be like. You might see them in your mind's eye, you might sense them or feel them to the touch. And inside the center of the cell, almost like the yolk of an egg, is the home of the DNA. So imagine now going inside the center of the cell and you're face to face with your DNA. And imagine what that would be like. You might see, sense, or feel the DNA with your hands. Now, the DNA, deep down, is made of atoms. So imagine going inside the DNA until you're face to face with its atoms. And imagine what they would be like. You might see them, sense them, or even feel them to the touch. And now imagine going inside the atoms. And what's unfolding is something like the night sky. And the stars that you can see are the protons, the neutrons, the electrons, the quarks, the particles inside the atom, like stars in the night sky. And you're floating so that the stars are above you and beneath you and all around you. And each of these stars or particles, they actually emerge out of the quantum field. So imagine going deep into one of the particles and arriving deep down at a place of just energy. Quantum field. Just waves of energy. Total stillness. Just pure energy, or even pure consciousness itself. And this is where all physical form arises from. So therefore, the patterns of energy, or what's known as the waves of any disease or illness, must arise from here. So imagine what these waves of illness or disease or condition, whatever you're focused on, imagine what they would be like in this quantum field. And then just mentally say the word cancel. And imagine these waves of illness, disease, or condition just go poof, gone. Almost like they've turned to dust, or they've gone up in a puff of smoke. Poof. They've completely gone. They've been eradicated from the fabric of space and time itself. so that all you're left with is beautiful waves of energy moving about gently in the quantum field. And now, just like you can drop a pebble in a pond and it creates waves, imagine now a star representing wellness or total wellness. And if that had a color, what color would that be? And just like a pebble dropped in a pond creates waves, imagine dropping that star of wellness down into the quantum field. Down, down, down. And as it lands with an om, creating waves of wellness, now building up and moving through the quantum field. And follow these waves of wellness out. Notice if they're traveling fast or slow. Notice if they're deep waves or shallow waves. Notice the color of the waves. Are they making a sound as they sweep out into the quantum field? Notice how it feels as waves of wellness are fanning out from the core of your being to fill the entire quantum field. And let's do the same again. Another star representing wellness falling down, down, down. And as it lands with an om, again sending waves of wellness moving out into the quantum field. And again, notice the speed. Are they moving fast or slow? Notice the depth of the wave. Are they shallow or deep? Notice the color, the texture. Are they making any sounds as these waves of wellness move out into the whole quantum field? And then doing the same again for the third time. Notice the star and the color of wellness as it falls down, down, and down as it lands. Om. Once again, sending waves of wellness moving out into the quantum field. Again, notice the speed that the waves of wellness are traveling out into the field. Notice the depths of the wave. Is it deep or shallow? Notice the color and the texture of these waves of wellness. Notice any sound that they make. And how does it feel as these waves of wellness are moving from the very core of your being to fill the entire quantum field that all things, all physical things arise from? And because the particles in the night sky arise from the quantum field, we can now bring our attention back to the night sky. But notice now anything that's changed. Notice any changes in color, sound, form, movement, feeling. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of a shift. And these particles come together to form the atoms. So the atoms ultimately have arisen from the quantum field of wellness. So as you bring your attention back to the atoms, notice anything that's changed. Notice any change in color, sound, texture, movement, feeling. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of a shift. And the atoms come together to form the DNA, which means the DNA in its entirety has arisen from the quantum field of wellness. So as you bring your attention back to the DNA, notice anything that's changed. Notice any change in color, sound, movement, shape, texture. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of a shift. And DNA comes together with other similar things to create the cells. So as you bring your attention back to the cells, which therefore must have ultimately arisen from the quantum field of wellness, and notice anything that's changed. Notice any changes in color, sound, shape, movement, texture, or even how it feels. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of a shift. And as you bring your attention back to the place that you started in the body, imagine that part of the body in a state of total wellness. Imagine that part of the body in a state of total wellness. Notice what that feels like, what it looks like or sounds like. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of a shift. And then just bring your attention back to the breath, the sound of your breath, the feelings of breathing, bringing more and more of your attention back into the room. Stronger breath now. You might even wiggle your fingers and your toes as you bring your full attention back into the room. And then just take a deep breath, have a wee stretch and open your eyes. And we'll just end the music there. Thank you very much for the music. So that's quantum field healing, just a wee 10-minute. So the idea behind it is to shift the idea that something is seemingly solid and impermanent to the idea that something is easy, something can be changed because it's waves of energy. And sometimes in the mind, when we tap into the mind-body connection, all we're doing is creating a realization. And the realization is enough for our own mind, our own consciousness, to somehow do weird and wonderful things. So I've tried to compact just about everything that's important, I think, to learn about the mind-body connection. I wanted to leave you, because we've got 5 minutes to go, I wanted to leave you with one extra tip that is exceedingly useful for those times when you go into fear and anxiety. What if it doesn't work? Or what if I can't change this situation? Because I know in life many of us are looking to change particular circumstances. And you get this pang of fear or anxiety. What if it doesn't work? What if it stays this way? And what's happening in the brain is, at that point, resources are flowing backwards in the brain to the fear and anxiety centers. One's called the amygdala. Goes backwards in the brain. And it puts you into a state of distress. Now, there's two types of stress. We call it stress, but there's actually two types. One's called distress, which is what we call stress. The other is called eustress, as in EU, eustress. And eustress can be positive stress. It could be the stress of challenge. Some people rise to the challenge. You're under a bit of stress. It's eustress. It could be the stress of exercise. But a very popular type of eustress is the eustress of laughter. So the brain cannot be in a state of distress and eustress at the same time. It's either one or the other. It's like a coin. A coin is either going to be heads or it's going to be tails. The brain can only be in distress or eustress. So a skill is, how do you flick a state of distress to a state of eustress? Especially when you're feeling like shit, when you're feeling anxious. A very simple way to do it is to move your body in a eustress way. Move your body in a way that makes you smile. So the simplest way to do it is burst into a silly little dance. that is completely the opposite to how you feel. The opposite. You want to go the opposite. If you're in distress, you've got to move to euce. So you have to move your body in a way that says, I'm enjoying myself. So you burst into a silly little dance, right? Like that. That's the only move I have, by the way, in case you're wondering. Silly little. And you have to do it long enough to force yourself to until you naturally smile. Now, the reason I say you naturally smile, when you naturally smile, it means that your brain is in a state of eustress, and now the muscles being stimulated is this one here that pulls your lips into a smile. It runs from here up to here. It's called your zygomaticus major muscle. And it is stimulated when you're in a state of the eustress of laughter. When you find things pleasant or amusing, your zygomaticus major, being connected to the positive centers of the brain, naturally tugs. So you can tell if you're in a state of eustress if you naturally smile. So you must do your silly little dance, whether it takes you 5 seconds or 2 or 3 minutes. You must do it long enough until you find yourself naturally smiling. And then you know you've taken the flow of resources that were going backwards in the brain and you've turned them round and you've sent them forwards. And if you practice this, you get quite good at doing it really fast. Even in your mind. You can just dance in your mind. Doing it right now. Check me out. Check my moves out. My God, I'm such a good dancer. See, in my head I'm doing it. And so you get really good at doing it fast, and then you get good. And what this does is it helps you to feel optimism and hope, which is much better state to be in than fear and anxiety. When I talk to I teach in cancer centers 3 or 4 times a year. When people are going through mainstream chemotherapy, they come to cancer centers as well to get some alternative treatments like they get massage and Reiki. Many of them get put through the mindfulness-based stress reduction program pioneered by Harvard Medical School, where they learn meditation and yoga, Tai Chi, these kind of things to relax the body. And sometimes the consultants come along and they love all this mind-body connection stuff because it's at the very least doing a visualization gives someone a sense of hope. Because it takes away the predominant feeling people have when they're very ill is hopeless. And everything's out there. Things being done to me. And sometimes just understanding the mind-body connection and that there's these things called visualization that do have real physical effects. It replaces hopeless with hope. And some of the consultants think it's such a great thing because at the very least if someone has hope, then that's something better than having none at all, than being hopeless. So what I've noticed comes out of this, victory dancing, is you're training your brain and your psychology into feeling positive and optimistic. And when I first came out with this idea, this application of victory dancing to change the flow of resources in the brain, I was literally doing it all the time, every time I could get a chance. And I used to do it in the morning when I was walking to my office, Starbucks, or any coffee shop. I used to live in Windsor, and every morning about 6:45, I would walk from my house, which was about a mile to the centre of Windsor, which is where Starbucks was, and that was my local coffee shop. And it'd take about 20 minutes, and I'd get there about the back of 7 every morning. And the first time I came up with this idea, this application of victory dancing, I thought, I'm going to victory dance on the way into Starbucks. So I'm walking along the main road, and I suddenly realised I've got my rucksack on and my laptop in my rucksack, and obviously I'm not going to walk along the road like that, 6:45 in the morning. So I thought, hands in my pockets. But I decided not to, because after a couple of seconds of walking along the main road like that, and wondering why some drivers were slowing down, for obvious reasons, I decided, well, that's not very clever. So what I thought I'd do is in my mind, I'll do it, and I'll just do it with my fingers, holding my rucksack like that. And when I got a wee burst of energy, I'd go, yeah, like that. But anyway, on this one morning, I was about halfway into town, and there's a big roundabout in Windsor, and there's an apartment complex called Pavilions, and they were still building it at that time. And I'd walked that road probably 4 or 5 days a week. When I'm writing a book, I write most of my books in coffee shops, and when I'm intensely writing 4 or 5 mornings a week, I'm in a coffee shop from back at 7 o'clock till about lunchtime, and that's where I do most of my writing. And I'd walked that road pretty much most days for the last year or two, and not one time had I ever got to that roundabout, and there's two underpasses. Not one time had I ever met anyone about 10 to 7 in the morning. So I figured, pretty safe bet I can totally go to town with the dance. So I got to the start of the tunnel, looked around like that. Obviously no one there. Start my wee move like that. And then I'm getting really into it, and then I start doing the John Travolta thing. You can see, by the way, like that. And then I'm starting to moonwalk. I can't moonwalk, but I was trying to do it anyway. And then I'm doing star jumps, and I'm spinning round, and I'm head bopping, and all this kind of funny. And then I'm doing that weird shit like that. And then I'm side to side, and I'm side to side, and I'm spinning round. And I'm totally lost in the dance. I mean, I got to the end of the second tunnel. It was that good, it could have been a Strictly. It was that good. And I got to the end, and I went like that. And then I looked in front of me, and there's a row of builders watching me. And I was absolutely mortified. I was, oh, fuck. And in moments of total embarrassment, you ever notice that your brain stops working? You ever notice that? That you can't think clearly. Actually, you want to know why that is? Because your brain goes into stress, fight, or flight. And you lose about 60 to 70% of the resources from the front of the brain. The front of the brain is your executive functions, your CEO. That's your thinking part. And you don't need that when you're under stress or facing a danger. The body just wants to move fast. You react. So you lose about 60 to 70% there because the brain has no need to think. You react. So that 60 to 70 go back and feed the fear and anxiety in the stress center so that you can move. So usually in a state like that, you ever noticed that you tend, because you can't think, that you tend to say or do something stupid? So here I am, like that, total mind blank, and I went, hello? And I'm now thanking my friend for returning my call. Oh, thanks for phoning back, yeah. And because I'd started it, you've got to keep it up. Because it'd be more embarrassing to stop. Because how do they know I've not got a real phone there? And it reminds me of my favourite comedian, Billy Connolly, years ago. 2 more minutes. Years ago, my favourite comedian, Billy Connolly, he was talking about a time when escalators first got invented back in the 70s. And he went on an escalator for the first time, and he was wearing his big hippie, flary jeans and his trendy shirt. And he's going up the escalator like that, feeling really, really good. And he's getting eye contact with all the girls coming down, and he's checking them out and going, yep, feeling really good. Never been on an escalator, big, long, flary trousers. And he's getting to the top, and the stairs are beginning to go flatten and go under a wee slit. And he looks at the wee slit, and he looks at his flares, and he thinks, what if my flares go underneath that wee slit? Well, I get, sucked in. And he starts to panic, and he's going, what the fuck? And he's taking a panic attack, and he's going, wait a minute. But he's trying to be cool, because the other young guys are there and girls, and he's trying to maintain his cool, but at the same time, he's having a panic attack, going, go. And you get to the top, and something's got to give. But you're so trying to maintain your cool that what actually happens is you trip. But here's the lesser of two evils. It'd be very embarrassing to admit that you tripped, especially when you're a young 18-year-old guy. It'd be very embarrassing to admit you tripped because you were afraid of an escalator. The lesser of two evils is to pretend that that's actually how you walk. But once you start it, you've got to keep up. She's walking through the shopping centre like that. The whole length of the shopping centre. But what you do is you gradually phase it out. And that's kind of what I was doing, because as I was walking out of earshot of the guys, the builders, I was beginning to talk more quietly. And eventually, as I was getting just round the corner, I went, okay, thanks. And I put my fingers back in my pockets. But testimony to the power of victory dancing, I got over that trauma by victory dancing. Anyway, we're out of time. I hope that's been really useful for you. It's been a real joy coming back to Glastonbury. If I don't see you again, enjoy the rest of your life. And if I do, we'll enjoy the rest of your life anyway. Thanks a lot.
David Hamilton, thank you very much. Brilliant stuff.
Thank you.
Well done. Thanks so much. Brilliant stuff. Thank you. David Hamilton.
Thank you.